Hello and welcome to the FITSNews studio. I'm your host, Dylan Nolan, filling in for our vacationing founding editor, Will Folks. There's been a lot of news this week. I'm going to sit down with Jennifer Wood to break down Buster Murdoch's recent lawsuit against a number of media outlets whom he alleges defamed him by insinuating that he had a role in the death of Hampton County teenager Stephen Smith. Jennifer and I are going to break down one defendant who you might not have expected to be named in a lawsuit like this, as well as the legal strategies and battles which will determine who comes out on top in the civil action. I'm also going to sit down with Andy Fancher, fellow journalist who's been spending the last 6 months compiling information about an alleged cover-up in Lawrence County. You've heard him speak about it on this show before, but just this week, he's come out with a new bombshell report which reveals a lot of information which we have not been able to report to this point, so I'm going to have the opportunity to sit down with him and dive into those details of alleged county-level corruption. All that coming your way on the FITSNews Week in Review. When you're in the media business as we are, it's really important that you stick to the facts, and if you don't, you can all but guarantee that at some point in time you're going to be named as a party in a civil lawsuit related to damages that you may or may not be causing to people by not telling the truth. And that is something that Buster Murdoch is alleging has been done to him. Specifically, he's pointing to the Discovery and Netflix Murdaugh documentaries, which heavily imply that Buster was involved in the murder of Stephen Smith, the teenager from Hampton County who was discovered on the side of the road. His death was officially ruled to be an accident. However, there's been speculation on many news outlets for years that his death was indeed a homicide. SLED has since reopened the investigation into Smith's death, and a number of media outlets have taken some Murdaugh ties to the Smith death investigation and run with it as Buster being directly involved. Now, at FITSNews, we received information early on from sources close to the investigation that Buster had an ironclad alibi. This was something that, fortunately, we took into consideration with our coverage, as we have not been named in this lawsuit. However, the distribution companies Netflix and Discovery, as well as the production channels or production companies which made the films for them, have been named in this lawsuit. And then a bit strangely, the Hampton County Guardian, which is a Gannett newspaper based in Hampton County, which is edited by Michael DeWitt, as well as Michael DeWitt himself, the editor of that newspaper, are named. Jennifer Wood, our researcher who has been with us throughout the whole Murdoch murders, crime, and corruption saga, every twist of the turn of the way, what do you make of this latest legal development?
It's like everything with Murdoch. I am always surprised and I'm unsurprised. It takes a twist and it turns 180 degrees, and for a second you're shocked, and then you're like, well, yeah, that makes sense. I think Buster, for a very long time was, dealing with the trial of his father for the murder of his mom and brother. I think, it's not something that the timing surprises me, because that's a lot to pursue a lawsuit while going through that at the same time. Buster, he's always been a complicated figure to me in the Murdoch saga. I don't think he's ever, he seems to me like he doesn't enjoy the spotlight. Alex Murdoch, he was, when he was out of prison, was one of those people that, enjoyed being the center of attention, enjoyed being the spotlight. And I've never gotten that impression from Buster. So, I think this is a big move for him. It's an interesting lawsuit. Do I think he has a case? I don't know. I mean, it's a lot.
I think whether he has a case and how this will proceed depends on a couple of things, which is I'd first like to turn back to Mike DeWitt and the Hampton County Guardian. There's, of course, theories circulating that Mike DeWitt, who, if you look at the severity of the allegations against, let's take the Netflix documentary, which has an actor who looks quite a bit like Buster carrying a baseball bat, which is, of course, how people mistakenly, in my opinion, allege that Buster killed Stephen. Once again, this is not based on anything from an incident report or from facts on the scene, but this is something that a lot of people say. That production company involved in making that was provided with information from at least some sources that just isn't what happened that night. And yet you see, I mean, that's pretty clear this documentary was viewed by millions of people. You then turn to what the complaint itself says about the Hampton County Guardian's publications regarding the Murdaugh family. And in the complaint itself, filed by Buster's attorneys, they reference the fact that the Hampton County Guardian was not even referring to the Murdaugh family by name. That's how careful they were to not point fingers at the wrong people.
Right. And, in all these documentaries, Michael DeWitt was not the only journalist that participated.
Our founding editor, Valerie Borline, many other journalists
Yeah.
associated with this story.
So, to me, you and I started discussing it yesterday, and you pointed out a very interesting fact, and I had not thought of it. I was like, oh, duh. Like the second you said it, I was like, ding, 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 about why you thought they added Michael DeWitt.
Right. If they can keep Michael DeWitt in this lawsuit and they can successfully argue in front of a Hampton County judge that the defendants should not be severed, they can avoid motions which will most definitely come from the defense that this is a case that ought to be in federal court or in that they should not be venuing this in Hampton County. If folks aren't familiar with the overall legal landscape in Hampton County, it is known as one of the most plaintiff-friendly jurisdictions in the whole country. So it is very funny that there are a number of Murdaugh-related cases pending in Hampton County. We're involved in one ourselves because it's a jurisdiction which, for decades, has been known as a place that is very friendly to plaintiffs.
Right. Yeah. I mean, as soon as you said that, I was like, they wanted the venue, Hampton County. That makes perfect sense. I mean,
because you read the complaint and you understand why Netflix and Discovery are being sued. And even I was watching those documentaries, knowing what I know and thinking, wow, they might get sued. You're dealing with a litigious family. Buster comes from a family of lawyers. He was in law school himself before he was thrown out for, it was either plagiarism or cheating, I believe. I can't remember which, but some honor in an integrity violation. We have audio that we've published ourselves of his dad trying to get him back in from in jail at that time. I don't know that the legal profession is for Buster, but he's certainly familiar with the legal system and how to exact retribution via the civil courts.
Yeah, and like with everything Murdaugh, everything that happens with Murdaugh, it becomes very divisive almost immediately. People are saying that this lawsuit is frivolous, that Discovery is going to be bury the Murdaughs, and people on the other side say Buster has a very, very valid point. He was the only reason his name was ever in this was it was mentioned in the investigation. So, you go back and look at the initial, when SLED announced they were reopening the investigation of Stephen Smith's death, shortly after the homicides, they announced they were opening it based on information found in the investigation of the homicide. But, later, a source close to SLED clarified the information was basically the incident reports and the number of times the Murdaugh name came up in that investigation in those files. That's why they were taking another look at it.
Right. The Murdaugh name does come up a number of times in the incident report. And as you just mentioned, Eric Bland, I think, said it best on Twitter the day after this lawsuit was filed. He basically said this could end up being PR-wise, a massive mistake for Buster and for the Murdaugh family, because they do have involvement. There's a reason they were mentioned so many times in the incident report. Now, Buster himself, the person who is the plaintiff in this lawsuit, has an alibi. We have been told by very credible sources. So I don't believe that it's going to come out in this discovery that he personally had any improprietous actions that led to Smith's death. But the nature of his relationship with Smith is something that would certainly be fair game in a deposition, and certainly something that you can expect attorneys to ask about, as well as other members of the Murdaugh family's relationship with Smith, as well as with the people whom many assume had an actual connection to his death.
But on the other hand, if I don't know that Buster would have hired an attorney and filed this lawsuit if he had any involvement in this.
That's what I mean. I think he thinks that he can get out of this deposition process clean. I do think that it will provide some clarity that folks, I think, myself included, had assumed that we would never get as to what was going on behind the scenes with the Murdoch family's larger involvement with the Smith case, because clearly there's something there. We don't
Right.
have enough outline of any details to report what exactly that was,
Right.
but perhaps after these depositions, we will. Now, I think there's a couple other important legal matters that will determine, the success or failure of this case. One, whether it stays in Hampton County. I think that's the most important thing. As we already discussed, that's a very plaintiff-friendly venue. It's about the best place that this could be for uh, the Murdochs, for Buster. And personally, I think that it's pretty unlikely that a Hampton County judge is going to uh, rule such that this case leaves the jurisdiction. But we'll have to see how that plays out. Another thing is whether Buster is legally considered a public figure, because if you're going to be bringing a defamation action as a public figure, you, me, people who put themselves out in the public willingly, government officials, there is a much higher standard of how wrong somebody has to be about you before it is defamation. They have to actually have malice in their incorrect statements about a public figure. Whereas if you are just recklessly saying things that aren't true, that are damaging about somebody who's not a public figure, that meets the standard for defamation. So will the court rule that Buster, and will South Carolina case law back up that Buster is a public figure or not? Now, on the one hand, he's a son of somebody who I think definitely would fall into the public figure category as a prominent attorney, but he didn't ask for his parents to be murdered. He was thrown into that limelight completely not of his own volition. So I could see a court looking favorably upon arguments made by his attorneys that he's not a public figure. So the standard by which whether or not he was defamed should be judged should be lower. It should be whether there was a reckless disregard of whether the facts backed up the way he was portrayed in these pieces of media.
Right. And I know people are always going to have differing opinions on this, but to me, Buster's never been an individual who has willingly put himself out there. I mean, I think every instance of Buster, being in the headlines, it wasn't something he wanted. The jail calls. Well, he didn't. I mean, clearly,
right. Your dad calls you from jail. You're going to pick it up and talk to him. It's not like he was going out and holding a press conference.
Right. And he's going on vacation and doing things that, somebody in their mid-20s do, and he's got people taking pictures. He didn't want that.
I mean, I think the Daily Mail stalked him down to his house on Edisto.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I got to give Buster a little break on that, but I don't know that South Carolina case law is going to agree with that. Even though he doesn't want it, technically he is a public figure now, unfortunately for him. But well,
he's certainly a public figure in the colloquial sense, but the colloquial sense does not, match up with whether a court will rule that way. And the best piece of case law we have in South Carolina, unfortunately, the name of the case is slipping my head right now, but basically it was a public high school football coach who was ruled by the South Carolina Supreme Court to not be a public figure after an appellate court ruled that he was a public figure. And that is definitely a stance that is different than the federal level and different than other states, in that it's leaning towards people who in other states might be considered a public figure not being considered a public figure in South Carolina, which if you're looking at this from Buster's perspective is definitely a positive development.
Yeah, for example, in Oklahoma and Texas, football coaches are considered public figures via their case law, which, it's Oklahoma and Texas. That didn't necessarily surprise me. But yeah, I mean, the standard in South Carolina is much different than other states.
Yeah, and by the way, the background of this case is really funny. I was reading it the other day. This coach, the whole reason he filed this defamation lawsuit is because he decided to run a no punt strategy that went so terribly in his town. They went like 3-7 for the season, that I think he got the boot, and then everybody was talking trash about him to the point where I guess legal action got involved. But yes, the whole reason that we have this standard is because of a no punt football strategy.
Sometimes the law just, it's fascinating, and sometimes you're like, really? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, I do think, like everything Murdoch legally, this is going to be an interesting case. And, you know, the people may not be familiar with Buster's attorney, Sean Kent, but he is an attorney that we have gotten familiar with over the past couple of years. He's definitely he's going to be an interesting figure in entering the Murdoch verse, I guess, whatever we're going to call it. He's definitely very outspoken, very adept with, PR. He's a good attorney.
This
He's a
case seems to
real.
be a magnet for PR attorneys.
I think anybody whose name is Murdoch and is tied to Alex, I think that is absolutely something that they have to consider when choosing an attorney.
And it's interesting because if you talk to folks in the South Carolina legal community, they'll tell you that this case has been shopped around to a number of attorneys for a significant amount of time, and Kent was the one who ultimately bid on it. So, like you say, I do think it takes somebody of a particular a bent and a particular attitude to take a case like this.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I really enjoy. He's one of those attorneys who you really enjoy reading their motions. He's very creative. He's very smart. He just worked on that 30-year-old child murder case in Berkeley and got the charges dismissed against the stepmother and father of the murder charges that were filed 30 years after the murder. Got those charges dismissed and dismissed, as he said, quoting Outcast, forever, ever.
There's one more legal matter that I'm going to be very interested to see how Sean Kent deals with, and that is whether or not these media outlets, and I'm specifically referring here to Netflix and Discovery, are afforded journalistic protection. That's because if you're a news outlet and a journalist and you're reporting on legitimate matters of public interest, you are legally afforded a little bit more leeway with what you can say before it's defamatory. I think that there's going to be an argument made by Buster's legal team, by Sean Kent, that these outlets were not acting in a journalistic capacity. I don't think anybody in their right mind is going to argue that Michael DeWitt and the Hampton County Guardian aren't journalistic, that Mike's a journalist and that the Hampton County Guardian's a news publication. But Netflix and Discovery, I think, were making pieces that are a lot closer to entertainment than they are to journalism, which I think is why they found themselves sitting ducks for a lawsuit like this. But it will be very interesting to see if they're afforded any special legal protection under the auspices of being journalists. Ostensibly, they would argue in court, of course, that they were producing a product which would give them this type of protection. But I'm not sure that a judge will be receptive of that when they're hiring actors and they're taking some level of creative interpretation of how these situations unfolded.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be something that I'm going to be interested in watching. But they're producing a documentary based on a true story. So at some point, if you are producing content that is supposed to be based on the truth, you do have a responsibility to ensure it's in fact true.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We do documentary type content here, but we never have had an actor act out a situation, that hypothetically might have occurred. We're usually just capturing footage of events as they occur and then interspersing it with maybe some pre-existing B-roll, but nothing where we're taking any narrative assumptions as to what may or may not have occurred. Even we were reporting cases which had similar speculative natures, like the death on the tracks, the death of DJ Smith. DJ Smith, like Stephen Smith, died in a way that officials report was above board, so to speak, an accident, but which there's a lot of well-founded speculation that it went a different way. We were never paying actors to stand out there on the train track and act like X, Y, or Z happened,
Yeah,
and then
everything.
making massive amounts of money off of it.
Right. Everything we reported from came directly from the actual investigation, from the statements of those interviewed by police, from everything that we FOIA'd. And, it's something that, you do have to tread very carefully on. And I know it frustrates a lot of people when they come to you with, what they think is a good story. And you're like, I've got to have the documents to back it up. I mean, you've got to give me something to work with. In DJ's case, his family, I mean, there was an investigation. Do I agree with the outcome of it? No, but that I was able to report on that from the investigatory file and all of the stuff that we voided.
I think at the end of the day, when you're in the media game, mistakes will be made, lawsuits will be filed. But what makes this case interesting is that the defendants, I believe, to the exclusion of Mike DeWitt, who I believe is in there just completely as a legal, he's completely caught in the legal crossfire here. I feel bad for Mike. I feel bad for the Hampton County Guardian, because I don't know that they're named in this for any other reason than lawyers being lawyers. But these other defendants, I don't know that they approached it with that same journalistic approach, which I think is why they are in the position that they are right now, being named in this lawsuit. So we'll see whether they try to argue in court that they were acting as journalists or whether they were trying to act as producers of entertainment content.
Yeah.
Time will only tell, but it certainly is why, when you're in the line of business that we're in, you have to completely dedicate yourself to the facts, because even if you try your hardest, try your utmost to, you will get them wrong at times. But if you start allowing yourself to get cutesy with it, you can really quite quickly get ahead of your skis.
Yeah. It's definitely, like everything Murdoch, it will be interesting to follow. So yeah, it's just an interesting case, again, legally.
I look forward to continuing to follow this, professionally. I don't know that Buster and I would be friends if I knew him. Frankly, he just doesn't seem like my type of guy. That being said, I feel absolutely horrible that he was thrust into, being a public figure, not of his own accord, because his sociopathic dad committed a number of horrific crimes. So to the extent that people have profited off of making his life markedly worse, I wish him success in seeking justice against them. And obviously for Mike DeWitt, who I believe is a good person who tries to report the truth and nothing but the truth. Hopefully, if there's justice in Hampton County, he will not be a part of this case for very long, but we'll see. I don't know that I'm going to hold my breath on that.
I'm a huge fan of Michael DeWitt, so I completely agree with you.
Well, thank you very much, Jennifer.
Thanks for having me.
I'm sitting here with Andrew Fancher. And you spent the last 6 months digging into the bowels of Lawrence County. Some people have said you're insane throughout the way, but this week you've finally been able to publish the information that you've been digging so deeply to get. And you've got some receipts here exposing potential corruption. I mean, let's call it what the situation certainly looks like it could be in Lawrence County. Right. Do you want to explain, just for folks who haven't seen your past appearances here, a little bit of backstory on who the major players are in this story, how it evolved, and then the new information which you've put out this week?
Sure. So as you identified here, I mean, what we appear to have in Lawrence County is, I mean, I hate to use the buzzword corruption, but I mean, that is what the receipts indicate we have, not only within every level of the city or the county, but the 8th Judicial Circuit itself, from the office of Solicitor David Stumbo himself. So the narrative is that in April of last year, there was a Lawrence County Sheriff's Office deputy, who I can finally name, Jonathan Devin Holliday, who was arrested by officers of the Lawrence Police Department when he, and we'll have to bleep this out, sent a threatening text where he said he was going to kill his wife, fiance. Yet, inexplicably, within 10 days of his booking into the Johnson Detention Center, his domestic violence 3rd-degree charge and entire case was dropped.
So you've reported that his wife, calls the police. She indicates that this threat has been made. The police go to the house, and you've reported that they found surveillance footage indicating that he had a weapon, a handgun, I believe, during this situation, which is why he was arrested, why he was booked. And it's interesting, as you report, he's a sheriff's deputy, but it was the town police who made the arrest.
Right. So one thing I do want to clarify here is I don't know who made the initial 911 call. It appears as though it was one of their neighbors who overheard this altercation that was occurring in their front yard. The altercation stemming from a dispute while his fiancée was out with their adolescent daughter. She was out on the town with some friends when he started sending a series of these threatening text messages. LPD officers, as you identified, were the ones who made the arrest. They counted, I believe, 6 Michelob Ultra empty beer cans throughout his house by the time they got there. And yes, to that end on the gun front, they were reviewing the deputy's home surveillance footage. And all we can definitively say is that, according to the officers who were present, a gun was in play. Now, to whatever degree, I don't know. In her own written statement, the victim's voluntary statement to LPD, she did not mention a firearm, but she did mention that her fiancé had, opened the back door of her car and was using their child as a prop to keep her from leaving the property that evening when she returned solely to grab items to then go stay at her parents' house. So that's essentially the narrative of this domestic violence charge that I'm told officers on scene were originally considering as a kidnapping case. Because it
certainly, if you're preventing somebody from going where they please, especially under the threat of force, that is...
With a firearm in play, allegedly.
That is certainly something that can lead to kidnapping charges.
Right.
Now, it's interesting, as I exposed, I did not know that it was not his fiancée who made that phone call, but that certainly makes what happens later in this case makes some more sense, because she did not end up cooperating with prosecutors. The case ended up being dropped, and it seems as though completely scrubbed from, all existence in as far as the public index, or as far as even if you learned of the existence of this arrest from other officers who were frustrated by the way that this case was disposed of.
Right.
So you go and you're knocking around asking, okay, I know that this happened. Can I have body camera? Can I have incident reports?
Well, based off of our correspondence with public officials out there, it appears as though FITSNews was stonewalled. I mean, that's the whole reason it's taken 6 months for us to get to this point. All right. By no help of our FOIA requests, by no help of multiple attorneys we were referred to throughout this arduous process. This report was made possible by anonymous law enforcement officers across more than one department out in the 8th Judicial Circuit that saw our active publishings of this case and said there is something horrifically wrong here, which is why they risked their LEO certification, they risked the comfort of their families, they risked their entire career to provide FITSNews with the information that they felt was indicative of a cover-up. Not only by LPD, not only by LCSO, but allegedly from the office of Solicitor Stumbo himself.
And as we go on in this dialogue here, we will make some pretty sad allegations of misconduct by various public officials here. But I think it's important to remember at the outset that this story wouldn't have happened if it weren't for some good public officials, the ones you mentioned who have been speaking to you, as well as former City of Lawrence Police Chief Keith Groundsel, who it was under his command that the arrest was originally made. And I think that speaks volumes when cops see another cop doing something wrong and are willing to step in and don't let that fraternity of police, that toxic brotherhood, where they sometimes stand up. It's obviously you want to other people in your profession, you want to stand up for them, but if they're doing something which is obviously violative of the law, such as threatening physical violence, allegedly attempting to kidnap people, that's a situation where you have to say this is bigger than that brotherhood,
right?
And we need to hold our brothers accountable. And Keith Groundsel was willing to do that. Unfortunately, shortly after, he was terminated, which...
So it's worth emphasizing here, he was resigned, all right? He wasn't terminated. And I also want to clarify that any praise that has come Groundsel's way has come by way of anonymous officers, not only in LPD, but throughout the Laurens County and 8th Judicial Circuit. We have only received one comment from him, and it was right after the resignation. And we published that, where we kind of held the attorney's feet to the fire that, hey, the police chief Groundsel might be gone, but we're still waiting for a FOIA. I mean, it took 2 chiefs for us to even receive the redacted FOIA of Jonathan Devin Holliday's arrest. Let's not forget that name. That county, that city, that department tried to keep that name as hidden as earthly possible. And now, not only is that name exposed, not only is his mugshot exposed, but now all of the supposed efforts to keep it from us is also coming to light.
And let's talk about that because, you know, as I mentioned earlier, and, you know, you had to sit down with Jennifer a couple of weeks ago where you were playing devil's advocate on the Mika Miller story and folks were really jumping down your throat. But it's a common thing we do in this profession. I think if you're in a newsroom scenario, you're immediately going to think devil's advocate on your colleague's stories if you actually care about your colleague.
Of course.
Because you want to see things from a different perspective and you want to challenge them so that they don't get out over their skis because you get invested in stories as you pursue them and you see things from one perspective, and it's really helpful to have colleagues, you know, challenge you. And so my first thought, my first challenge to you was, okay, well, you're dealing with the fiance is not a cooperating witness. And you told me that in South Carolina, this is specifically a state which has statutes that in domestic violence cases, specifically, you don't need the cooperation of the victim because it's considered a crime against society if you're willing to do that type of thing. And unfortunately, in so many scenarios, folks who are abused, you know, they stay with their abuser and they certainly don't want to testify against them in court and ruin the rest of their life.
Right. Right. So, and that is the case here. So it doesn't matter if you're saying, no, don't press charges on my fiance that, you know, threatened to kill me over text. That doesn't matter. It's up to authorities higher than yourself.
Obtained evidence of them, you know, committing that threat is enough for prosecution to continue in South Carolina. And from your understanding of this case, there was certainly enough evidence to continue forward with a third-degree DV charge, which has, you know, it's one of the less serious domestic violence charges, was what ended up eventually being pressed. So you would think it would be a fairly easy charge to pursue, you know, compared to a more serious DV charge.
Well, I mean, hell, we have written about state troopers, about officers who have received DV third charges, whose mugshot was plastered throughout the state of South Carolina. This one never made it that far. It never made it into the public ether.
Right, and that's why I want to emphasize the evidence that we have and the you know, legal status of DV cases in South Carolina. When I say it's very strange that this case got dismissed by allegedly the solicitor himself.
No, it's not allegedly. I mean, his name is signed at the bottom of the letter.
So his name is on the letter, and
he submitted into writing that he, Solicitor Stumbo, was dropping the case. There was not enough evidence to press charges on any of the parties involved.
We have a number of members of the legal community in our audience who probably are thinking, that's strange. A solicitor is going to weigh down on a pretty low-level charge, getting personally involved in something like that.
Misdemeanor when he only really handles murder cases.
Right. And that's where eyebrows start getting raised. How did the solicitor get involved in this case? Was this you know, did he receive a phone call from somebody basically and
according to local attorneys out there, there's no way that a call was not placed to the solicitor in order for him to so much as look at this case, which corroborates almost this echo chamber of LEOs in Laurens County, which is that Sheriff Don Reynolds allegedly made a phone call, at least one. I'm told by multiple members of his own department that he was physically, emotionally involved in this situation as soon as the morning after it happened. And that it's also worth noting that Don Reynolds has DV charges himself. Oh, well, and we've tried to make that abundantly known through our publishings during the sheriff's race, that, hey, this man has domestic violence charge. He pulled out his service weapon on his then wife in the 90s, or maybe it was either the 80s or the 90s. We have the paperwork for that. We've published it more than once, hell. So we have a sheriff who succumbed to a DV charge, who allegedly
stepped in here.
Whether or not he saw to it that his deputy returned to uniform within 3 weeks, that happened.
Right. Regardless of how this happened, the charge was dropped.
Of how this happened, a sheriff who once had a DV charge against him too allowed a deputy to return in uniform within 3 weeks, where I'm told Holliday's first arrest once he returned to uniform was for domestic violence.
That's ironic.
That's like Jared from Subway charging somebody for child sex crimes.
Right. And if those allegations are true, he just shouldn't be a law enforcement officer anymore. I mean, if you're going to be making violent threats and abusing, the fact that you're physically able to dominate a female in that way, I don't know that you should be trusted to have a badge and a gun. And unfortunately for society, we never got to parse out whether those charges were in fact valid, because the case was dropped off the docket
immediately. Yeah, before most things are even filed in any type of situation.
Right. If you know anything about the South Carolina justice system, it moves like
just
molasses in wintertime.
Right.
It's a very slow-moving system. And the unfortunate thing here is, will we ever see accountability? Because, we got the individual cop who was accused of domestic violence. That's bad enough. But in South Carolina, we know our sheriffs are criminals. I mean, we see sheriffs arrested almost every year. There's at least one sheriff arrested. And that's because it's an elected position where, any cowboy in any county can run and win, and then you have an immense amount of power.
Well, I mean, hell, in Jasper County alone, Chris Malfris just won the Republican nomination. He's the subject of a 416-page investigation by the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, and he just won the Republican nomination.
Right.
So, yeah, we know our sheriffs are corrupt.
Our sheriffs have a long history of corruption in this state, and
But it does also bring into focus, what is one to do in a situation like this, where the highest authorities of a county or a circuit are potentially the criminals?
And that's the situation that allowed the Murdoch family to reign the way that it did.
Right.
Because they were largely unchecked in their region of the state. And the idea that it was just them in the Low Country operating in that way, if you're familiar with how South Carolina operates at all, is laughable. It's laughable. And the fact that it took Alex's life unraveling as dramatically as it did for them to finally be held to any level of justice by the state, it's telling. And the speed with which that was done is telling of the fact that they wanted that in the rearview mirror rapidly.
Right.
Now, if the state is seriously committed to preventing the Alec Murdaughs of the future from continuing to get up to similar antics, they need to stick their fingers in at the county level, whether that's the AG who has oversight of all of the solicitors in the state, who could initiate through the statewide grand jury some sort of investigation into this. Or
do they have to be requested? Or can the AG
statewide grand
stand
jury,
in?
I believe, has wider authorities than. I don't believe that they need to be requested, but I could be wrong about that. The SLED, on the other hand, in most situations, needs to be asked by another agency to step in.
Unless under absolutely exceptional circumstances, and I no longer believe in miracles, then yeah, it's got to be requested.
So as far as will we see anything come of this at the state level, even after all of this extensive reporting you've done exposing a very disturbing pattern of facts, and after, and if it's one thing if you kind of put this together on your own, okay, this is disturbing, but you don't have a full picture. Well, with the sourcing that you've done over the last 6 months, there are a lot of people who have put their necks out,
dozens.
Guys who they have families. They're providing for their families, and they put their careers on the line to share this information with you. This is certainly a case where there's a lot of smoke, and I believe that if investigators were allowed to look into what happened in the back end, if they were allowed to issue subpoenas, if they had a warrant, there certainly could be information obtained that could lead to further legal proceedings here. But I don't know that we're ever going to see that. And I guess let's round our discussion off here with the final, we've gotten the initial deputy who allegedly committed domestic violence. We've gotten the institutional leaders over at the sheriff's department, over at the solicitor's office. We then have the second Town of Lawrence police chief. Unfortunately, the first one we referenced, he led the kind of department which is not afraid to arrest a county deputy when they believe that there was criminal action. So God bless that man. He's doing his job properly. Unfortunately, it seems as though the next person who was hired is kind of the exact opposite of that. And this is the person who was giving you hell for the last couple of months as far as obtaining any information about this case.
Anything at all. So now Lawrence Police Chief Heath Copeland, he was the first authority I spoke to at LPD actually to kind of kickstart this FOIA that was kind of quasi placed in December, but definitively, assuredly placed in January of this year. And in fact, before he commandeered that phone call to the records department, I mean, hell, the records operator told me they're not going to give you anything because you're a reporter. So nonetheless, he commandeered that phone call, handled the FOIA, which means we haven't gotten anything from the county really to this day except a redacted incident report that removed the deputy's name from it. So yes, the chief has been accused of just about everything under the sun by members of his own department of violating FOIA laws, of withholding information from us, of purportedly panicking when we did submit the FOIA. I don't know what this man is supposedly so scared of, but we know that he's in good with Sheriff Don Reynolds. Hell, here's a picture of him with the sheriff just recently. So, did he commit a crime in the video that we're about to show? No. But do some argue that it's an admission of guilt? That he started sifting through the locked offices of his subordinates once we started publishing that there were whistleblowers within his department? Potentially.
It seems as though there was not a lot of trust for guys who joined the department when the former chief was there.
It appears as though anybody who was a former chief groundsel hire was a suspect. I am told by LPD officers that they would watch as he would pull people in one by one. And are you talking to FITSNews? Name dropping FITSNews directly. All the while professing that he is the guy for the job, that he's never done anybody wrong, that he's never lied. I'm told that Copeland says that quite frequently still.
Right. And look, at the end of the day, as far as, the moral hierarchy of wrongdoing in this story, this guy is kind of on the lower tier. I mean,
he had the chance to be a police chief, and he didn't. He had the chance to stand up to the mayor, who, while yes, a police chief answers to the mayor, you still got a job to do as a police chief. All right? The mayor, while technically letter of the law is your boss, you are a damn police chief. And I emailed him on the 30th of last month, before we published the hidden camera video of him searching through the office, and I said, listen, I know that we have had an interesting relationship since you were appointed chief, but it's never too late to do the right thing, to set things straight. Do you want to take advantage of our open microphone policy here at FITSNews and just talk to us? Just be a police chief. Can you guess what we heard back? Nothing.
Right. And by the way, it should be emphasized, you've extended that same offer to the mayor, to the solicitor.
To the sheriff, yes. And the solicitor, to his credit, did provide a comment.
Right. Comment denying that, that
if it did happen, it didn't happen.
Very vague comment.
Yeah.
So, it's not like you and I are bandying about here one-sided without asking the other side here, can you please provide an explanation?
They have had 6 months to create even a lie, and they haven't done that. How many times have I sat in this chair talking about that deputy's arrest? A lot. How many times have we mentioned that? Many times. So now it's
I think all of your
finally
cards are on the
formulated.
table here. I mean, folks can take the situation however they'd like, but they can now see the cumulative effect of all this work that you've done here. And it's a very disturbing situation. As somebody who wants to live in South Carolina for a long time and wants this state to not be completely governed by the good old boys system where, you know, you're dealing with an officer of the state, a law enforcement officer, and you're wondering, is this person corrupt, or are they going to be protected if they abuse me by people higher up the food chain?
Let's protect the criminal, right? Yet ostracize the officers throughout multiple departments who made this possible. What's going to come of them? What's going to come of people making this public?
Well,
it's concerning.
I mean, we're going to have to just wait and see.
I'm going to have to look both ways before driving through Lawrence County.
Yeah, I would advise that you just avoid Lawrence County at this point.
I'll go through Greenwood if I need to get to Greenville.
Right. But yes, Andrew, thank you for staying on this story. I hope that something happens here beyond just us flapping our gums about it.
Yeah.
But even if that's, you know, the only outcome here, if no legal action happens, at least folks have been made aware of something they should certainly be upset about and take to not only the voting booth, but at the county level, but at the state level. And hopefully we can get some leaders who are willing to stomp out this kind of corruption when it allegedly happens.
Let's see what happens.
Thank you so much for bearing with me as I host this special edition of the Week in Review. We won't have Will back next week. However, the FITSNews staff will be doing our live month in review. We do this the last Friday of every month. It's at 11. It's live on YouTube. It's a great opportunity for you guys who are interested in the content that we make to come and speak with us directly. You can hop in the live chat and we are responding to what folks are saying. In addition, if you have questions on any of our stories, you can find all of us on social media and reach out to us in the week leading up to the story, and it is more likely than not that we will incorporate those questions and conversations into our live dialogue. So once again, next Friday at 11, come join the FITSNews staff, interact with us, ask your questions. We'd be happy to answer them. Thank you once again for watching this edition of the FITSNews Week in Review.